Prophet's ascension to heaven on the night journey and direction of the first Qibla lay in the center. The rock was uncovered and the ground purified. It was suggested that the Muslims pray to the north of the rock, to include it in the Qibla when facing south toward Mecca. But Umar rejected this idea and possible confusion by praying to the south of the rock, at the southernmost wall of the noble sanctuary. A huge timber mosque which held 3,000 worshippers was erected on this site, the site of the present Aqsa Mosque. 50 years later, near the end of the 7th century, it was given to the Umayyad Caliph, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, to construct one of the world's most beautiful and enduring shrines over the rock itself. Highlighting the skyline of Jerusalem and the memories of all that visit, the Dome of the Rock is a tribute to the Muslims' love and respect for this site. Thabit al-Bunani reported on the authority of Anas that God's messenger said, "I was brought al-Barak, an animal white and long, larger than a donkey but smaller than a mule, whose stride was a distance equal to the range of its vision. I mounted it and came to Jerusalem, and tied it to the ring used by the prophets. After entering the mosque and praying 2 rakats in it, I came out, and Gabriel brought me a vessel of wine and a vessel of milk. I chose the milk, and Gabriel said, 'You have chosen the true religion.' We were then taken up to heaven." Muslim transmitted it. After completion of the Dome of the Rock, construction began on the site of the original timber mosque at the south end of the sanctuary. A vast congregational mosque, accommodating over 5,000 worshippers, rose up. It became known as Masjid Al-Aqsa, although in reality the entire Haram al-Sharif is considered Al-Aqsa Mosque, its entire precincts inviolable. The next 5 centuries of Muslim rule were characterized by peace, justice, and prosperity. Scholars came from all over the world to worship at Al-Aqsa and to study and teach within its precincts. Except for a brief period under the Fatimid Hakim, which caused as much hardship for the Muslims as the Christians and Jews, the Islamic injunctions to respect the rights of the people of the book were respected throughout this period. "And we gave Moses the book, and made it a guidance for the children of Israel, saying, 'Take not unto yourselves any guardian other than me.' They were the seed of those we bore with Noah. Surely he was a thankful servant. And we decreed for the children of Israel in the book, 'You shall do corruption in the earth twice, and you shall become great tyrants. So when the time for the first of these came to pass, we sent against you servants of ours, men of great might, and they ravaged the country, and in it was a promise performed.'"
وآتينا موسى الكتاب وجعلناه هدى لبني إسرائيل ألا تتخذوا من دوني وكيلا ذرية من حملنا مع نوح إنه كان عبدا شكورا وقضينا إلى بني إسرائيل في الكتاب لتفسدن في الأرض مرتين ولتعلن علوا كبيرا فإذا جاء وعد أولاهما بعثنا عليكم عبادا لنا أولي بأس شديد فجاسوا خلال الديار وكان وعدا مفعولا.
In 1078, bands of Seljuk Turks took Jerusalem. They ruled for the next 20 years, during which time the rights of Christian pilgrims were regularly trampled, together with almost everyone else's, in the paths of their fierce internal rivalries. In 1096, the First Crusade was called by Pope Urban II, ostensibly to redress violations of pilgrims' rights. Hundreds of thousands of Christians were mobilized to defend their faith. Sanctified by religion, spurred on by the promise of adventure and material gain, a ragtag army of knights, foot soldiers, women, children, and old men marched across Europe to their destination and their goal, the holy city of Jerusalem. 3 years of marching and mayhem, much of it against their co-religionists and unfortunate pockets of Jews who crossed their path, and a remnant of the Crusaders, perhaps a tenth of those who had set out, reached the gates of Jerusalem. It was the morning of June 7th, 1099. Ironically, by the time they arrived, the city was back in the hands of the Fatimids, and the rights of Christian pilgrims had been restored. After a 5-week siege, the city's ramparts were stormed. The Crusaders ran amok. For 2 days, the 40,000 men, women, and children of Al-Quds were massacred in the streets, in the mosques, and in their homes. Muslim soldiers were slaughtered in Al-Aqsa Mosque after being guaranteed amnesty there. The city's Jews were burned alive in their main synagogue, where they had huddled together for refuge. Al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock were looted. A golden cross was placed on top of the Dome of the Rock. It was renamed Templum Domini. Al-Aqsa Mosque became Templum Solomonis. In their enthusiasm to link the glory of the noble sanctuary with their own heritage, the new conquerors erased every trace possible of its Islamic origins. In the Dome of the Rock, Quranic inscriptions were plastered over. Steps were carved into the rock, and an altar placed on top of it. Chips of the rock were sold for their weight in gold. Al-Aqsa Mosque was subdivided into a royal palace, as well as headquarters and barracks for the Knights Templar. The vast vaulted subterranean area to the east of Al-Aqsa became a stable for 400 horses. All this had not passed by entirely unnoticed by the Muslims outside of Jerusalem. In 1146, Nur-ad-Din Mahmud ibn Zangi, ruler of Aleppo, commissioned master craftsmen to build an extraordinary cedar mimbar. It was to be installed in Al-Aqsa on the day the Crusaders were expelled from Al-Quds. It was Nur-ad-Din who, through an auspicious joining of statesmanship, piety, humility, and honor in his own character, reunited the Muslims of Syria into a force capable of rising in jihad against their enemies. But it was his lieutenant and successor, Salahuddin, who was to lead them into victory. Generous almost to a fault, shunning luxury and ostentation, Salahuddin was merciful with those he conquered, but ruthless to anyone who maligned the Prophet and the path of God. On the 2nd day of October, 1187, the 27th day of Rajab, the day Muslims celebrate the Prophet's night journey, Salahuddin entered Jerusalem after a 12-day siege. There was no bloodshed. There were no massacres. Those who wanted to leave were permitted to do so with all their goods. Those who wanted to stay were guaranteed protection for their lives, property, and places of worship. The wisdom of the Caliph Umar was observed, the laws of Islam restored. The cross on the Dome of the Rock was taken down. Al-Aqsa was purified with rose water and reinstated as a mosque. The magnificent mimbar commissioned by Nur-ad-Din 40 years earlier was put into place. After 88 years of occupation, the Jummah prayer was held once again in the furthest mosque. The Crusaders dressed in black. They sought aid throughout Europe to recapture Jerusalem. They soon returned and laid siege to the Muslim coastal stronghold of Acre. Richard the Lionheart joined them in the spring of 1191. By July, the city was surrendered into the Crusaders' hands. 2,700 Muslim soldiers and their families were assembled and massacred outside the city walls. After a year of struggling to get a toehold from which to regain Jerusalem, Richard finally capitulated and returned to England. The rights of Christians to worship at their holy sites were guaranteed, and Salahuddin's authority in all but the coastal areas of Palestine was confirmed.